Good morning to everyone interested in the current political situation in Hungary. This is a short announcement for all those of you who speak English only. In a few moments, I will give a few informations about Zoom in Czech, as the vast majority of the registered participants are Czechs, and I have to explain to those of them who need it how the translation into Czech works in Zoom. So please be patient for some moments. The introduction of the guest and the debate itself is going to be held in English completely. Dobré ráno, milí zájemci a milé zájemkyně o aktuální dění v Maďarsku. Dovolte mi úplně na úvod upozornit na to, že dnešní debata se povede v anglickém jazyce. Ti z vás, kteří nás sledují přes Zoom, mají možnost si stisknutím tlačítka Interpretation v dolní listě Zoomové obrazovky zapnout české simultánní tlumočení. Zoom se ještě bohužel zcela neadaptoval na své aktuální globální užívání a tak češtinu najdete pod francouzskou vlajkou. Ti z vás, kteří nás sledují přes facebookový stream, bohužel možnost tlumočení do češtiny nemají. Pokud na Zoomu všechno funguje a ti, kteří tlumočení potřebují, ho mají nastavené, přejdu zase do angličtiny. So now back into English. As you in Zoom have probably already discovered, we cannot see or hear you, and there won't be, for time reasons, the possibility to ask questions with your voice. If you have any questions or comments, please use in Zoom the Q&A module, which you find in the bar at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Those of you following the Facebook stream, please use the comments section. You don't have to wait with that until the end. Please ask whenever questions arise to you, and our moderator will try to incorporate them into the discussion. If anything doesn't work technically, please write it into the chat window. And now, finally, the introduction. My name is Kateřina Smejkalová, and I work with the Prague office of the Friedrich-Ebert Foundation, which is today's hosting organization, together with Masarykova demokratická akademie. We would also like to thank the FES office in Budapest for its kind cooperation on this event. Our dear guest today is András Bíró-Nagy, director of the Hungarian think tank Policy Solutions. Warmly welcome virtually in Prague, András. Our moderator is Petr Drulák, political scientist, currently based in Prague at the Institute of International Relations, and also former Czech ambassador to France. Dear András, dear Petr, the floor is yours.
Hello everyone. Thank you, Kateřina, for your kind introduction. I think now it's floor of András, because András co-authored a very interesting report on 10 years of the rule of Viktor Orbán in Hungary. So we will start with András' summary of the report, and then I'm sure we will have a host of questions and comments, which we will then direct to András. So welcome everyone, welcome András, and you have the floor.
Thank you very much. First of all, to Friedrich-Ebert-Stiftung's Prague office and also to Masaryk Academy for organizing this event. Of course, Hungarian politics is never boring, but now we have a special occasion to talk about what has been going on in Hungary and what is going on in Hungary nowadays. And it's the 10th anniversary of Viktor Orbán's government. It was in April 2010 that Viktor Orbán's Fidesz party won a landslide victory at the Hungarian elections. And since then, I think what has happened is already well documented. So what we wanted to do in Hungary at Policy Solutions, with the kind support of the Budapest office of Friedrich-Ebert-Stiftung, was to do a research about how the Hungarians see these 10 years. What are the strengths and what are the weaknesses of the Orbán government? And what do they think of these 10 years in general? So this is what I will speak about as an introductory remark in the next probably 10 minutes. So what we've seen about these 10 years and what the Hungarians think about it is that probably the most successful part of Viktor Orbán's governance has been its communication machine. So in terms of PR and in terms of propaganda, they have been extremely successful in the last decade. And the first graph will show you what I'm speaking about. Because actually the first three things that comes to the minds of the Hungarians when it comes to the areas where Hungary has made the most progress in the last 10 years, the first three are those issues exactly on which the Hungarian government has spent the most money in the last 10 years in terms of communication. Probably you've all heard, even in the Czech Republic, about the very tough anti-immigration rhetorics and politics of the Orbán government. Actually, this was the key topic of the last 5 years in Hungary, and it made number 2 on our list when the Hungarians had to choose the fields that they liked the most from the last 10 years. The previous election campaign in 2014 covered the issue of utility cost reduction. So the reduction of electricity prices, reduction of water prices, of gas prices, and so on. And this was a key issue in order to reach out to opposition voters as well. So when it comes to the most popular measures of the Orbán government, we have to realize that there are some issues that can go beyond the traditional Fidesz base, go beyond the traditional Orbán supporters, and can even get the support of the opposition. And the great example of this is the utility cost reduction. Actually, according to our poll that we did just before the coronavirus crisis, so in the beginning of March this year, it showed that, for example, this kind of cost reduction for electricity, gas, and water prices was an even more popular measure among opposition voters than among Orbán supporters. But the number one issue of the last 10 years in Hungary, according to the voters, is the family policies of the Orbán government. Mostly when it comes to Hungary, the outside world normally discusses the developments in terms of democracy or the migration policies. But it rarely gets mentioned that the conservative family policies of the Orbán government are highly popular. And this has been the flagship policy of the Orbán government for the last 2 years. So besides playing with the fears of immigration, there is a kind of social policy that the Orbán government is promoting very much, and it is to have more and more children. So big families receive much more state support than 10 years ago, and this is what the Hungarian society considers as the biggest achievement of the Orbán government. Let's move to the second graph, which shows very well what are those issues that are considered as the biggest problems or the biggest failures of these last 10 years of Orbán rule in Hungary. And I think that this graph, and especially the first 3 items again, show very well that the coronavirus crisis actually draws the attention to the weakest points of the Orbán government, or at least what the Hungarian society thinks that they are the weakest points. Of course, the healthcare aspects of the coronavirus crisis is pretty clear. Hungary, just as the remaining part and the other parts of Central and Eastern Europe, of course, this crisis has been much less serious than, for example, in Italy or in Spain, or in France or in the UK. But at the same time, it can be seen that the quality of healthcare has been a primary concern of the Hungarians over the last decade, and it is so at the very moment as well. So this is why I think it's absolutely crucial for the Orbán government to handle the healthcare aspects of this crisis well, because it's a really serious threat to them if something fails. Another aspects which are critical aspects of the government is the social side of the governance, increasing social inequalities and working conditions, the vulnerability of employees, the situation of the workers in general in Hungary has been considered as the issue number 3 in the from the last decade. And maybe just as an interesting part, I would show you the item number 5 from this list, which is climate change. I think if we would have done this research 2 years ago, climate change wouldn't have even reached the top 10. So it's clearly a very recent development, and it now shows very well that that climate issues can even become key issues in terms of public policy, and can have very serious political consequences and importance, even in some countries of Central and Eastern Europe. Of course, I would be interested to know what is the situation in Czech Republic regarding climate change, but what is clearly happening in Hungary is that the importance of climate change is going up. And when it comes to the last 10 years, now the opposition voters, especially the opposition voters and especially the younger voters, start to blame the Orbán government for not coming up with an ambitious enough program to tackle climate change in the Hungarian context. And now the climate change issue is at the same level of importance in the eyes of Hungarian voters as the growing Russian influence or the huge level of corruption. So I think it is really striking how the climate change issue has become more important over the last few years. And maybe just one more thing to the biggest problems in Hungary over the last decade. The international debate about Hungary normally concentrates on democracy and the democratic decline of the country. And when we asked about the democracy and the state of democracy, what I can tell you is that the majority of the Hungarians are aware of the problems, and they think that the quality of democracy has worsened over the last decade. But at the same time, when we ask them about the importance of the democracy issue, you can see that it's much lower on this graph. It is number 10 in our list of the biggest problems in Hungary. So this shows very well that, of course, Hungarians are aware that there are some negative tendencies when it comes to the quality of democracy, but at the same time they find a quite long list which they consider as much bigger problems in their everyday lives than the democracy-related issues. Now I think we can go on to the third graph, which shows the overall evaluation of the last 10 years in the eyes of the Hungarian voters. And what we see here is that there are more people in Hungary who think that the country is overall in a worse condition than it was 10 years ago. How do we get these numbers? These numbers show very well that the supporters of Viktor Orbán and the supporters of the Fidesz party are actually a minority in the country. But the biggest luck of Viktor Orbán is that there are many undecided voters who cannot even choose an opposition party for themselves, but at the same time they are unsatisfied with the situation of the country. So there is a hidden tension in many people who don't express this tension on election day, actually. So the biggest luck, and I think that this graph shows it very well. So when we add together those people who are opposition voters and are unsatisfied, and undecided voters who cannot choose an opposition party, but they are also unsatisfied, then we can see that in this country, in Hungary, there are more people who are unsatisfied with the overall trends of the last decade than those people who are satisfied. But of course, this also points to the quality of politics made by the opposition over the last decade. And I'm pretty sure that we will have some opportunity to talk about the opposition later in our discussion. And let's go to the fourth one, the fourth graph, which is the final one. This just further elaborates on the previous graph and shows to you that in most of the fields that we asked about the Hungarian voters, in most fields, there are more people who think that the situation has worsened over the last decade than those who think that things have improved. The best numbers for the government come again in the situation for having children in Hungary. So once again, family policy is clearly number one when it comes to popularity in Hungary. And what is, I think, very important also to add to the reasons why Viktor Orbán's government has been popular so far is the economic legitimacy of the government. The macroeconomic numbers have been pretty good over the last few years in Hungary, and apparently those who are keen to vote for Viktor Orbán, they also believe that the state of economy has improved and their living standards have improved in Hungary. It doesn't mean that the majority of Hungarians would believe that they are better off than 10 years ago, but most importantly for the government, what comes out is that the Hungarian government voters, the vast majority of them, believe that the state of Hungarian economy and their living standards have improved. So the economic legitimacy, I think, is of key importance, besides conservative family policies, besides nationalism, besides the migration policies. I think that the economic dimension should be also mentioned. I don't have more graphs, so you can take the graphs off, but I would say a few more words before we start the discussion about who the real supporters of Viktor Orbán and his Fidesz party are. Because what our poll made last month has 2 months ago, showed pretty well is that the voting base of Viktor Orbán has been transformed quite significantly over the last decade. According to our results, Viktor Orbán's supporters are now older than ever, are more rural than ever, and are more lower educated than ever. So the Hungarian governing party is actually now overrepresented and can rely mostly on the votes of people over 60, the lower educated people, and those who are living in the villages. And I believe that this has been a remarkable trend over the last few years. And electorally, this can even pay off for Orbán. The trend has been going on, I believe, since the migration crisis has erupted, since 2015, when the Fidesz party started to radicalize in terms of policies, but also in terms of language. And this radicalization of the governing party actually caused that some of their more intellectual supporters started to leave the party, but at the same time, Viktor Orbán gained even more voters among lower educated rural people. So this has been largely a trend that can be later reflected in the local elections results of 2019. Last year, probably you've heard about it, that Viktor Orbán and his Fidesz party lost Budapest, for example, to the opposition. And the governing party also lost some of the biggest cities in Hungary as well. Actually, 4 out of the 5 biggest cities and 10 out of the 23 cities with special status in Hungary. They were all lost to the opposition. But at the same time, the governing party's support went further up in rural Hungary. And given the Hungarian electoral system, if everything stays as it is now, or as it was at the local elections last autumn, I think that Orbán could win again the elections comfortably. Not with supermajority, what they are having now, but with a simple majority, I believe they could win. Because simply there are more electoral districts in the Hungarian electoral system relying on mostly villages than urban districts. So I think that this has been also a quite open and straightforward electoral strategy of Orbán as well, to go and increase support in rural Hungary, go and increase support among the lower educated people who we have in larger numbers than graduates, of course. And if they can succeed in rural Hungary, then maybe can even allow themselves to lose, for example, Budapest. So I think that this has become a clear strategy for Orbán. And finally, my final introductory remark would be about the state of democracy, because this is what we talk about the most when it comes to the international discussion about Hungarian political developments. It has been clearly a free fall in the last decade in Hungary, what has happened with democracy. And I think that it is pretty clear from our research about the 10 years of Orbán that the Hungarian people are aware of it. When we asked about whether they thought that the quality of democracy has improved or worsened, 50% of Hungarians said that the democracy of Hungary has worsened over the last decade. When we asked a different question, and we asked about whether they still think that Hungary is a democracy or not, then 50%, close to 50%, said that Hungary can be no longer considered a democracy. And we had a question concerning democracy, and it was about whether the Hungarian population still thinks that it is possible to change government in Hungary in a democratic way. And actually, we have the same number of people in Hungary now who believe that Viktor Orbán's government cannot be changed anymore in democratic elections, and those who think that it can be still fired democratically. What I have to add here is that these numbers do not only show the lack of trust in democracy in Hungary in general. Of course, it shows a great deal of that as well. But at the same time, the lack of trust from many people to change government in Hungary comes to the lack of credibility or the lack of trust in the opposition parties, that they cannot imagine that the current opposition could beat Orbán in a democratic elections. So it's not only about the quality of democracy, but it's also about the political context. It's also about the strength of the opposition. It's also about the strength of the competition in the Hungarian context. And I think that in this respect, the opposition has a lot of work to do. What is maybe giving a little bit of hope to the opposition is that according to our data, if we compare it with our data from 2 years ago, the mood has clearly changed in a positive way among the opposition voters and even more among undecided voters when it comes to the possibility of changing government. 2 years ago, the pessimism among those who are not Orbán supporters were even bigger than today. And probably this is the effect of the local election success of the opposition parties from last October. I think it gave back the hope to many people in Hungary that yes, Viktor Orbán can be fired one day, and even through democratic elections. I think I will stop here, and I'm looking forward to your questions.
Thank you. Thank you, András, very much for your very, I would say, thought-provoking presentation. There are many things which I find simply fascinating. And one of these is what I see as a sort of a contradiction. Because, I mean, you clearly choose what are the issues for which Viktor Orbán is appreciated. And they tend to be sort of a right-wing issues. I mean, immigration is a clear right-wing issue, and the family support has, of course, a social aspect. But I understand that in Hungarian case, it's also framed as the support to a traditional family. So we see two right-wing issues which are very high on the agenda and people appreciate it. And then when we look at the issues which people consider neglected and with which they are not satisfied, these are obvious left-wing issues. So it's the healthcare, it's social inequality, it's workers' rights. So so what we see here is a clear space, a political space for a left-wing party. because people demand it, they call for it. But when we look at the election results of to the European Parliament last year, we still see that more than half of Hungarians voted for Viktor Orbán. I mean, this number is incredible. I mean, in Czech Republic, no one has half of the votes. That's something which we still find amazing. So, and you sort of hinted at it, that there are some sort of lack of credibility of opposition forces. So my question is, after 10 years in power, I mean, the people need to be tired. I mean, both the voters, but also the people in the government, they usually grow tired and corrupted. I mean, they would have to be angels not to get corrupted after 10 years in power. So there is this 10 years, there is a demand for social, for more of social justice. And then, I mean, in the elections, it's half of the votes who vote for Orbán. So what's going on the left wing of the Hungarian politics?
Yeah, of course, this is a very relevant issue. But before I go into the details of the left side of the opposition, what I have to tell you is that the Hungarian opposition's biggest problem has been over the last decade that it is very fragmented, that we have a lot of kind of oppositions in Hungary. We have radical right opposition, which is the Jobbik party. We have liberals. There is even a new youngster liberal movement. I just call them the Hungarian Macronists. They are called the Momentum movement. We have some Greens in the Hungarian context, and we also have some socialists or social liberals in the political spectrum. And I think that this shows very well that even within the opposition, there is a clear race between different streams of the opposition in order to win the ruling narrative, which can be considered as a successful strategy against Orbán. And I believe that you are right, that when you interpret the results about the biggest problems of the last decade, it clearly opens up space for a more straightforward left-wing or more socially aware, a strategy that is more based on social justice. So I fully agree with you that the left-wing alternative has to be a central part of any challenge towards the Orbán government. On the other hand, what we see is the growing importance of the climate issue. And I also believe that when it comes to sustainability is not only about the sustainability of planet Earth and the nature, but it's also about the sustainability of the society, how to create a more just society. So I believe that the green agenda can be very complementary to the socialist agenda. So from this perspective, I think that now every strategy, what I see rising in the opposition side of the political spectrum, is more or less starting to count on a more socially just alternative to the Orbán government, so to a greener alternative to the Orbán government. And what comes also as a common point among all opposition parties, it can be the Western orientation of the country. As you know, Viktor Orbán has been pretty Eurosceptic over the last decade. He is normally doing a freedom fight, at least in terms of rhetoric, against the European Union. And clearly, those parties on the opposition have been most successful last year at the European elections, who were the most pro-European. So I believe that a more European-friendly alternative can also be part of the opposition narrative when it comes to the next elections.
Thank you. I would just like to invite all the participants to present their questions. I have the screen so I can read them. So once you pose your question, I will give it to András. So in the meantime, I would like actually to jump on what you said about the Western orientation. because it seems to me that there is a lot of ambiguity about it. Because, I mean, obviously Viktor Orbán used a lot of rhetoric to delimit himself, to distance himself from some part of the West. On the other hand, it would be really difficult to label him as someone who is anti-Western. And the question which comes to my mind is actually what happened in Hungary 2 years ago, when the government adopted a very harsh social laws. It was the reform of the labor code. Some of the critics even talked about the slave law, so the law which is supposed to enslave the workers. And the same critic pointed out that this law was actually dictated by the German investors, that it was at the demand of the German car makers, that the Orbán government made this law to actually worsen the working conditions of the Hungarian workers. So I just wonder whether you agree with this analysis of the thing, that there was this influence of the German capital on the labor law, and in a more general terms, is it the case that there is actually this clash between domestic Hungarian capital or Hungarian oligarchy and the international capital, international oligarchy? The international oligarchy being invited by socialists, whereas the Hungarian oligarchy being cultivated by Orbán. So I just wonder what you think about this kind of analysis, which is also presented by some left-wing Hungarian thinkers.
Yes, in general, I agree with the analysis. There is an ambiguity in this, how Viktor Orbán handles Western Europe in general. Because politically, I think that he would like to have as much freedom as he wishes, and he doesn't want anybody to have a say on what is going on in Hungary. So when it comes to democracy, he wants a free hand. But when it comes to the economy, actually he's supporting those Western European multinationals, especially in manufacturing, who are vital to the working of the Hungarian economy. So when it comes to the race between Hungarian national oligarchy and international investors, are in those fields in which the national capital is also competitive. But when it comes to, for example, car making, then there is no rivalry on behalf of Hungarian industry. It is clearly, for example, the German or the Japanese car makers who are here in Hungary, and they are given very favorable economic conditions, very favorable taxing conditions. For example, the lowest corporate tax rate in the whole European Union, which is at 9%. This is what we are having in Hungary, and plus other very important subsidies for foreign capital in order to come to Hungary and create jobs. But at the same time, in other fields in which the Hungarian oligarchs can also do the job, then there is a clear race between the two, and the state is clearly supporting some of the Hungarian oligarchs who have risen, for example, to the Forbes billionaire list only within the space of a few years' time, thanks to the government. So there is this ambiguity. At the rhetorical level, Viktor Orbán is clearly Eurosceptic, but the Orbán government is always very careful in striking deals with Western European capital. So I think that as some Hungarian left-wing thinkers have described, this is a dual capital accumulation regime, because it allows capital accumulation for the Western European big multinationals in the Hungarian context, and it also allows capital accumulation for the Hungarian national oligarchy. But of course, another key aspect of this situation is that in order to boost the existence of foreign multinationals in the Hungarian context, the Hungarian government has also allowed to make more flexible the labor law. And this is what was called, as you already mentioned, 2 years ago, as the slave law. It provoked huge demonstrations, even despite the fact that the whole thing happened in December. So even in freezing cold, there were thousands in the streets of Budapest and other cities across the country. And it clearly showed that there is a hidden unsatisfaction with the working conditions and working rights of the Hungarians, and that the Hungarian opposition should much more pay attention to these issues. And I think that our survey from this year underlines this fact, that there is growing space for the Hungarian opposition to focus more on social issues and focus more on working rights as well.
Thank you. I would like to welcome two questions we received, one from Poland and one from Czechia. So let's start with the Polish question. Do you see potential economic post-pandemic crisis as a challenge for Fidesz hegemony as well as a chance for socialists? I think it's because this comes to my mind, obviously, because one of the first issues with which people were unhappy was the healthcare. So I wonder what the COVID-19 will do with this. Is this something which could seriously undermine and present a challenge to the stability of the current rule?
I believe that the Hungarian Prime Minister has more fears concerning the economic and social aspect of the coronavirus crisis than the actual healthcare aspects. It has been pretty clear that Viktor Orbán fears the upcoming political situation because of the mass unemployment which has already started. So the first statistics show very bad numbers when it comes to the newly unemployed people. Also, there is a threat of growing poverty again, further growing inequalities, and the poor suffering most of the costs of the current crisis management. I believe that the biggest threat for Orbán is if he doesn't address the loss of income of many voters and the loss of jobs of many Hungarian people. We are talking about hundreds of thousands of people who have lost their jobs or lost their income in the last 2 months. And so far, the government response has been favoring once more the big companies. So it tries to give some tax cuts. It tries to support the companies to overcome the crisis, but it doesn't give too much support for those who are personally affected in the current crisis. And I think that this puts Viktor Orbán's government in a more vulnerable position than any time during the last 10 years. I would not say that it would automatically close the decline of Orbán's power in the Hungarian context, and it's because it has such a huge power over everything, over the whole democratic structure of Hungary. It has taken over basically large parts of the Hungarian economy as well. Their loyal people are sitting in all of the independent government oversight institutions as well, from the State Audit Office to the Constitutional Court, from the Media Authority to the Fiscal Council. So what is clearly can be frightening for Orbán is that because of the ongoing economic and social crisis, if they don't handle it well, I think that their economic legitimacy that I have mentioned to you in the introductory part of my presentation, this economic legitimacy can come under threat. But at the same time, Orbán can always react by going more authoritarian than before. And I believe that the last 2 months and the decrease that the Hungarian government has done in the last 2 months, which have nothing to do with handling the coronavirus healthcare crisis, but it was more about taking money away from the authorities run by the opposition, or taking away state funding of the political parties. There were measures like creating special economic zones, which can be taken away from the city councils. I explained this to you because normally in many cities outside of Budapest, some big factories, mostly run by Western or Asian multinationals, are providing the local business tax, or the large part of the local business tax. And Viktor Orbán invented during the coronavirus crisis the creation of special economic zones that could be taken away from for example, from the opposition-run cities, and could be handled at regional council level. And all the regional councils are run by Orbán's Fidesz people. So they are immensely creative when it comes to how to abuse such crisis for political goals as well. This is why I would say that, of course, I'm also counting with some decreasing support for Orbán's party if the economic and social crisis goes on for a long time. But at the same time, I also expect them to continue on the way of more authoritarian regime, of building a more authoritarian regime. And they are always creative when it comes to new measures with which they can further strengthen their actual political power.
Thank you. I'm happy that our list of questions is getting longer and longer. So we have good questions. But there is still space. So I would like to invite everyone who feels that he would like to raise the question to do it. So the first question on the list is actually linked what you just said about the crisis, because in the crisis situations we often have like two kinds of behavior of the voters towards the leaders, towards the government. Either the government is seen as incompetent and the crisis greatly damages the government, or the government is seen as someone who is the only option to save the nation. And often the authoritarian governments can profit actually from crisis situation. So judging by what you see, what you have seen in the last 2 or 3 months in Hungary, would you say that in the crisis situation the government is getting more support, or in general, how do crises affect the stability of the government? Because in Europe we have crises all the time, so it's important actually to know how the crisis impact on the viability of the rule.
Yeah. Okay. The starting point in the Hungarian case for the governing party was already from a very high level. So as you already mentioned, approximately half of the Hungarian voters who would actually vote on a voting day, so not counting the total population, but actually those who are likely voters, half of them are Fidesz supporters. The other half is not Fidesz supporters, but they are rather fragmented. So the opposition only has a chance for any success against the current government if they unite, if they cooperate, and if they unite. What we've seen during the current crisis is that the support for the Orbán government remained at a high level. Maybe they even gained 1 or 2% more. But at the same time, nobody expects that in 1 or 2 months, the total consequences, political consequences of the crisis could be seen. Of course, it's a very natural phenomenon to rally around the flag. And this has also happened in the Hungarian context as well, that in times of serious crisis, people want to believe in their leaders. This is going on in Hungary as well, but to a much lesser extent, because the Hungarian political debate is so polarized. So not many opposition voters trust more Viktor Orbán than 2 months ago. But I think that for the moment we cannot see in its entirety what will be the political consequences of the crisis, because I believe that only the economic crisis and the social crisis will show what political consequences Viktor Orbán should count with in the long term. So we might see a stable situation now, but in 6 months' time or in 1 year time, I think that the erosion in terms of support would be probably more visible. So this is my expectation when it comes to the long-term consequences of Viktor Orbán. So the short-term consequences have been so far pretty good for them. First of all, because they gained more power for them, but also because the Hungarian voters still support them, and 50% approximately of the Hungarian voters would still vote for them. But let's wait 6 more months, let's wait 1 more year, and then we will be able to see if Viktor Orbán can overcome such a big economic and social crisis that he has never seen during the 10 years that he has been in power.
Thank you. Another question which is on my list is actually about politics and money, because I mean, you analyzed the electoral support of Viktor Orbán, but for politics you also need an economic support. So one of our participants is asking about the economic sources of the Orbán rule. Are there specific tycoons or big fortunes which are related with Orbán? And Orbán himself, is he suspected of having accumulated economic fortune himself?
Okay, regarding the sources which found the best the Hungarian oligarchy is the European Union funds. It is as clear as that. Everybody knows that in the Hungarian context. For example, an investigative website made the research of Hungary's #1 oligarch, who is called Lőrinc Mészáros. He's actually a childhood friend of Viktor Orbán, and he's coming from the same village where Orbán is having his holiday home, and where Orbán built a football stadium next to his holiday home. So the former mayor of this village became actually Hungary's richest man within the space of 5 or 6 years. This guy made the Forbes billionaire list, so he's even billionaire in terms of US dollars. And the guy, according to this investigative journalism piece, received approximately 80% of his income from EU funds over the last few years. So EU funds clearly boosted the Hungarian economy in the last few years, and clearly boosted the government-related oligarchs as well. At the same, besides the European Union funds, the government parties' oligarchs, or the business, let's put it this way, the businessmen close to the government can also rely on the so-called strategy of Eastern opening. This Eastern opening is cultivating good ties with Russia. It's about good ties and even increasing ties with China, for example. And there have been also ongoing deals with Erdogan's Turkey or some Arabic countries as well. So just to give you 2 examples of major construction projects that give the businessmen close to the governing party a huge fortune, is the nuclear power plant project financed by the Russians in the city of Paks. And another one, and it's a newer one, is the train line, the railway between Budapest and Belgrade. It is going to be built with Chinese money, and it has been a recent proposal. And again, the company is related to Lőrinc Mészáros, the very same guy that I just mentioned to you. Fortunately for them, won the tender for building from the Hungarian side the railway between Belgrade and Budapest, and this is going to be the second biggest infrastructure development in Hungary. The first one is going to be the nuclear power plant, which is going to be built from Russian loan. So this Eastern opening of the Hungarian government shows very well that they are looking for alternative financing So they don't want only to rely on Western European funding, because with Western European funding, sometimes there are some, let's put it this way, some requirements as well. Some requirements in terms of protecting NGOs or protecting academic freedom, protecting democracy, human rights, and so on. But when it comes to Russian money or when it comes to Chinese money, they never ask anything like that. So they just want to make business, and Viktor Orbán enjoys the situation in which he receives the funding, but no requirement come with such funding.
Thank you. Another question which I find really important is also the role of personality, because I think we have been talking just about Viktor Orbán, but I mean, it's the party and it's not one man rule. So how do you see the outlooks for a possible opposition inside the party or alternatives inside the party? Because I mean, in your from your analysis, you have some hope that outside of Fidesz there can be something which grows out on the basis of the local elections. But what's going on inside Fidesz? Is it a firm rule of one man, or is it like a more collective decision making?
It's a firm rule of one man. So it's no wonder that when we speak about Fidesz party, we normally speak about what Viktor Orbán wants, because the two are equal at the moment, and there are no rival groups within the party. This is an extremely disciplined party. Nobody speaks out, so no criticism is allowed within the party. If somebody says something which can be considered as a negative comment, then these comments have immediately negative consequences in the career of such a politician within the Fidesz party. And what is pretty clear is that as long as Orbán wants, it's his party completely. He handpicks the candidates in his office. So they come one by one to his office, and then he decides himself who can run as a candidate and who cannot run. So there is no, let's say, local party unit autonomy or anything like that. It's complete central rule. And this is why I think that the role of personality, also the role of charisma, but it's also his power within the party that should be mentioned whenever we speak about his political party. So I think that as long as he's around, it's his party, and you should never imagine the Fidesz party as a forum of internal debates or something like that. No, we normally don't see that.
Thank you. Looking from outside, I think many people ask the same question. How does it help if you have an external criticism or an external pressure on the country? Because this can have two effects. I mean, the effect which weakens the rule, but also the effect which strengthens the rule by saying, look at these foreigners, they are attacking us. So I just wonder, from your judgment of the Hungarian situation, is this external pressure welcome, or what kind of pressure? Because myself, when I was posted in France, I actually encountered many of very badly informed criticism of Central Europe. So many of the people who were criticizing Central Europe didn't know absolutely anything about the region. So I just wonder how you see this external pressure.
What I see is that if the political debate between, let's say, European leaders and the Hungarian government remains at a rhetoric level, for example, in debates in the European Parliament, or if Viktor Orbán just gets some critical comments in the Western European press, the Hungarian Prime Minister and the government in general just couldn't care less. So what I normally say to my international colleagues is that because it has been pretty clear in the Hungarian context as well, that the only language that Viktor Orbán understands is the language of power. He doesn't understand the language of soft power. So when it comes to just some critical comments or some reports by the, let's say, the Venice Commission or Council of Europe or a parliamentary debate in the European Parliament, they are just not considered as an important a source of criticism that Viktor Orbán should pay attention to in the first place. What he normally pays attention is what, for example, the CDU party in Germany says and does, what Angela Merkel says and does, what Macron does, because these are the developments that could have, for example, that could come, for example, with direct economic or political consequences. So when it comes to the future EU funding, for example, then Viktor Orbán is fearing that it can have very serious consequences on the future of the funding of the Hungarian economy if Hungary loses too much money because of the government's policies in terms of democracy over the last decade. Or if, for example, the German multinationals would start to behave a little bit differently in the Hungarian context, that I think would also have an influence on how Viktor Orbán behaves. But just the rhetoric criticism simply doesn't have any impact. These rhetorical fights between Western Europe, or I would say even European institutions, and the Hungarian government has normally just strengthened the support of Viktor Orbán within his political camp. So Fidesz voters completely buy the argument what you have been saying, that yes, the foreign actors want to force something on us, that the foreign actors are attacking us, regardless of the content, because I also find very well informed criticism about Hungary as well. I think that Hungary has been very well covered over the last decade in the international sphere. So these criticisms, the vast majority of them, are pretty well founded. Of course, there are always mistakes as well from some Western European politicians or from Western European journalists when it comes to the Hungarian government, but I would say that in general the criticism is pretty accurate. But regardless of the content of the criticism, I believe that the Hungarian government has been able to portray all these criticisms as attacks of foreigners on Hungarian national sovereignty. And this is what works with Fidesz voters pretty well. But at the same time, what I have to tell you is that opposition voters even expect the European actors and the European leaders to stand up more forcefully. So the expectations towards Europe is quite twofold. The opposition voters expect the European Union to please help save the Hungarian democracy. At the same time, the Hungarian government voters want to get rid of any so-called foreign interference. And they would like to keep Hungarian national sovereignty at the maximum level.
Thank you. I have now a more specific question concerning Jobbik, because Jobbik was always considered the real threat for Hungarian democracy. And I think Viktor Orbán played with it somehow, showing that there are people who are much more dangerous to democracy than himself. Now, what we saw actually last year in the municipal elections was sort of an alliance or cooperation of all democratic parties with Jobbik. And then I read, and I think it was one of your reports, a statement which says that Jobbik has changed quite significantly and that it has an important left-wing feature. So could you just explain us what's going on there with Jobbik? Because the very fact of the cooperation of democratic parties with Jobbik against Orbán is something which is surprising from outside.
From the outside, yes. From the inside, not that much anymore. Of course, everybody has in mind in Western Europe the image of the original Jobbik. The original Jobbik from 10 years ago, let's say, it was a pretty racist organization with paramilitary activities. It had the Hungarian Guard. It set up a Hungarian Guard which was marching in villages, frightening the Roma minority. There were politicians who were doing anti-Semitic comments. The Jobbik party was burning the EU flag even 8 years ago, so it was the most Eurosceptic that you can imagine. But roughly 6 years ago, Jobbik party started a mainstreaming strategy, meaning that it started to get rid of the radical elements, also the radical members, and by now, this political party is considered by the other opposition parties less as a threat to Hungarian democracy than Viktor Orbán. So the current Jobbik managed to get rid of basically all the most radical and extremist elements. They even formed a new party. So the party basically split in 2018, and the most radical guys formed a new party which is called Our Homeland. Our Homeland received around 3% at the European parliamentary elections, and they aim for 5% at the next parliamentary elections. So now, when it comes to the original image of Jobbik, it is no longer done by Jobbik, it is done by Our Homeland. And Jobbik tried to come towards the center, and the new president of the Jobbik party actually said in his first speech that his goal is to reach out of the losers of the regime transition, which means basically when it comes to voting groups that it would like to become more a rural working class party than ever. So it is talking more about social issues, talking about poverty in rural Hungary, talking about how to improve the situation of the workers at the workplace and stuff like that. So of course it's still a conservative law and order party, but at the same time it talks more about social issues than ever. So this is the new Jobbik that we have. Just to give you a feeling of how they transformed as a political party and how they got rid of the racist elements, or at least they tried, is that this new president of the Jobbik party, who is called Péter Jakab, his grandmother actually was Jewish, and his great-grandfather died in Auschwitz. So this is the former anti-Semitic party now, that you have the party chairman who also has some Jewish origins. And the remarkable transformation of Jobbik, another indication of that, is an MP who is called Márton Gyöngyösi, who is currently the only MEP in the European Parliament of the Jobbik party. A few years ago, he was looking for, or he demanded actually, the listing of Jewish people in the Hungarian parliament. He was like that. It's like 6 or 7 or 8 years ago. The same guy this year issued a statement on Holocaust Remembrance Day, remembering about the atrocities of the and the awful history of the Second World War. So this is the kind of transformation that Jobbik has been going through. And following this transformation, and as I have to tell you, this is not a one-off communication campaign. So it's not for one electoral campaign, for example, but this has been a strategy of Jobbik for more than 6 years now. And they have been pretty consistent with their wish of getting rid of the racist past. And now, following this transformation, Jobbik has become more acceptable to the left-wing or liberal or green opposition. And also electorally, what I have to tell you is that without Jobbik, there is no hope of being competitive against Fidesz. So this is why I think that the incorporation of Jobbik in the opposition coalition last autumn at the local elections, it was absolutely vital. I'll just tell you an example. In Budapest, for example, Jobbik decided not to run any candidates. So it basically gave the opportunity for the green left challenger to go basically one-on-one. de facto one-on-one, not formally because there were some other candidates, but it was practically one-on-one against the Fidesz guy. And the Green Left challenger beat the Fidesz guy. The same happened in rural Hungary. And in two big cities, Jobbik received the opportunity to go alone against the Fidesz guy. And the left-wing and liberal opposition didn't field any mayoral candidates. So basically, the opposition divided the country among themselves. And in some places where Jobbik was stronger, Jobbik received the opportunity to field the single candidates against Orbán's ruling party. And believe or not, the Hungarian left-wing voters were gladly voting for the Jobbik guy just in order to kick out the Fidesz guy.
Well, I think that's clear enough, because I mean, and that's very different from the reputation Jobbik still has outside Hungary. Ladies and gentlemen, I have many questions, and some of you posted further questions, but our time is up. So I would like to give a big thank to András, because you gave us a very you gave us very interesting insights into Hungarian politics, into Hungarian life, which go way beyond your report. And I recommend the report which you presented, which is freely available, because it sort of summarized nicely the main issues on Hungarian politics to date, and other reports which you authored and which are equally interesting. So I would like to thank to András and to all the participants of this webinar, and maybe that we will meet each other at another Friedrich-Ebert-Stiftung webinar in next weeks or near future, but I would prefer actually more traditional kinds of meetings as well. So hopefully they will take place. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.